This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Thanks very much. It's exactly the same. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Writers on Film. My name is John Belisa. I'm a writer and filmmaker, and today I am sitting in the garden of the Estonia Hungaria Hotel, which is the location that was used by Mike Figgis in his film Hotel, a very daring sort of multi-screen, multi-layered, non-narrative experimental art film, which only I have seen. I've seen it. Oh, wait. My guest today, Bilge Ebiri, has also seen it, and so we are both we're both glorying in the shadow of this movie. Welcome to the podcast. This is the second part of our Venice report, and I've invited Bilge, who is a writer for The Vulture, available at a measly $4 for a 1 month trial subscription, which I've just done because I wanted to read some of Bilge's reporting from Venice, and now I can confidently discuss and argue with him from a position of knowledge. But first of all, welcome to the podcast, Bilge.
It's good to be here. I did not remember that this was the hotel from Hotel, which is funny because I was just thinking of Hotel just the other day, because there is obviously a Mike Figgis film here at Venice. But yes, very good to be here again. Thank you.
And so let's go through. We've watched loads of films since the first report I did with Nicholas Bell. We talked about Guadagnino, we talked about Sorrentino, and we talked about Begonia as the three major films. I'm not entirely sure if there was another film that we talked about. There might be, but it doesn't matter if there's a little bit of overlap. But now, since then, we've seen a whole bunch of movies which picked up some. Oh, The Smashing Machine, I think, was the last film we'd seen. We'd just seen. So since then, we've had an opportunity of seeing Catherine Bigelow's new film, A House of Dynamite. We've seen Kufa Ben-Hania's film, The Voice of Hind Rajab, the Tunisian film director based on the story from Gaza. And we've seen, what was it? The Testament of Anne Lee?
Testament of Anne Lee. And we've seen Testament of Anne Lee, which was a couple of days ago. It's so funny. We saw Frankenstein. I saw Olivier Assayas's The Wizard of the Kremlin. You lasted not quite the whole movie. 30 minutes. What else? It's funny. It's a lot of people say it's been a weak competition this year. I don't know entirely if I agree. I also don't have enough perspective to be able to say it's a weak competition. I can say there have been a number of films I've loved. In competition and out of competition. Jim Jarmusch's Father, Mother, Sister, Brother as well. Gus Van Sant's Dead Man's Wire, which is not in competition, but is still very good, and obviously, it should have been. I mean, a very good film from a great director, which feels kind of almost, you don't want to quite say return to form, because he has been working, and he did that Truman Capote miniseries that people loved that I didn't see. So, But yeah, there's been a lot of movies. One might even say too many movies. But it's a film festival, so.
Well, let's start with our with a point of disagreement in terms of The Wizard of the Kremlin, which was a film which I lasted 30 minutes. And usually I don't walk out of films. It's something that I'm becoming increasingly good at in terms of thinking, I've got a good book on the go. I usually do sit and watch films that I'm not enjoying, but as I didn't have to write about it, I don't want to overstate. I didn't walk out like in disgust or horror or anything like that. I just thought I got this. I know where it's going. I know what it's done, and there's nothing coming that is really going to surprise me or knock me on the head. However, you wrote an article which you very much framed as John Bleasdale is wrong about this film. I don't know was that the headline?
That was not the headline. However, the headline, I mean, because I didn't, this is maybe too much inside baseball, as they say, for your listeners to care about. But the way, festivals work is there's press screenings in the morning usually or the night before, and then there's usually an embargo for reviews, which coincides with the first public screening, which is the kind of the premiere gala. So while all these people are on the red carpet and getting their, introductory standing ovations in the Sala Grande, dozens, possibly even hundreds of reviews of their films are dropping online, which is a very strange position to be in, probably, if you're a filmmaker. But I knew I wasn't going to have my review in time for the embargo. I also heard from other critics how much they hated it. So I thought, well, my piece will run later, and I'll frame it almost as a response to the critics, even though it's still just a review. I mean, basically one sentence in the review just says, Olivier Assayas is getting some of the worst reviews of his career, because he's kind of a critic's darling usually. And which I found odd, because I did love the film. I mean, I walked out of that film thinking this was exactly the movie I wanted to see right now. You didn't get to see Jude Law as Vladimir Putin, because he shows up a little later. I thought he was excellent. I thought he did a great job sort of translating Putin's kind of technocratic conceit into this sort of this body language of a man who really just doesn't care about anyone else in the room. And I quite liked Paul Dano as this kind of placid-faced creep who's basically spent the last 20 years shaping Putin's public image and also shaping Russian public opinion, and in some cases world public opinion, often by inventing things. And he frames his journey as being very much about responding to events, responding to the way Russia is changing, responding to the way people are seeking security and things like that. But at the same time, what becomes clear over the course of the film, and this is kind of a classic Assayas theme, is the idea that he has been absorbed by the reality that he's created. And in many ways, he's responding to things he's created and claiming himself as just kind of a mere pawn, a mere victim. It's an expansive film. I later found out that it was actually shot just earlier this year, and I think they shot it like 5 months ago or something. So it was rushed into production and post-production. So maybe we'll get a different cut. I don't know, based on sort of how people have responded to it. I found it incredibly moving. I found it incredibly riveting. I lived in Russia in 1997, and I found its recreation of that world, of the age of the new Russians and sort of the post-Soviet era. I found it very compelling. It felt very familiar. I felt like I was back there. And I'm also just fascinated by modern Russian history. So the movie was just like catnip to me. But yeah, I loved it. I feel very strongly that its reputation in future years will be intact, but who knows?
You've always got to have that, that counter opinion that, and there were those films that definitely survived their festival. People have reclaimed films like Southland Tales, and other films have had absolute disastrous. Apocalypse Now had a rocky viewing in Cannes to some degree. It did, so we can't. That's okay. I retract.
Well, I will say Assayas has had some films of his that premiered at Cannes to somewhat disastrous reception. And I was there for and I was one of the people who initially did not enjoy Personal Shopper. And I was there for the press screening where it got booed and everything, and now a lot of people consider it his masterpiece. I don't know that I'd go that far, but I like it more than I did back then. I believe Demon Lover was originally, I wasn't at Cannes for that, but I believe Demon Lover was initially, quite savaged and now is considered kind of a canonical movie for him. Assayas is a character who it took me some years to come around on him. And I've interviewed him a few times. I love talking to him. He's one of the most fascinating, articulate people ever, even when he's made bad movies. And his last two films have not been well received either. So who knows? Maybe he's in a kind of artistic downturn. But I really enjoyed this. I do hope, I don't know. I don't think it has distribution yet in the U.S., so I don't know when it'll open, on my side of the planet. But I'm really looking forward to seeing it again.
Yeah, I mean, to just sort of articulate some of the reasons I was less enamored by it, every line in the film seemed to be very much about Russia, and I kind of this is a film directed by a Frenchman, written by a Frenchman, based on an Italian novel, played by actors who are Swedish, British, and American, and everything that comes out of their lives are definitions of the Russian soul. And I just found I was kind of interested in your review that you said, this is really uncanny how they've captured Russia. So you're more qualified than me, certainly, to talk about that.
I mean, I'm maybe more qualified than you, but I'm not particularly qualified. It was more a kind of sense memory I had as I was watching it, which helped pull me in even further into the story. And, the film's vision of history very much, and the film is based on a novel, which is kind of a historical novel, but the central character is a fictional character who's kind of partly based on a real figure in Russia, but also probably more of a composite character. So, I mean, it's kind of like, I was a big fan of another much hated Venice title from a few years ago, Blonde, which was also based on a novel. But a lot of people saw it and responded to it as a kind of nonfiction, biopic. And the director's response was, well, this is fictional. It's not really meant to be sort of what really happened. That can be a bit of a chicken shit response, because you are presenting something, you are presenting a real character, in some cases a semi-real character within a realistic context, and sort of saying, providing an interpretation of a person's biography and history. I still love that movie, and I love this movie, but there is this very fine line filmmakers sometimes walk, and even if they base their films on history, they walk that line of, I am creating a fiction and I'm making choices as a filmmaker to show certain things and to show certain things a certain way and to depict a particular reality that I have partly imagined. And I'm sure as a filmmaker, as an artist, it's very hard for you to say, this is as it was, this is how all these events actually transpired. But at the same time, you are presenting a piece of film that when we watch it, we accept it as reality almost subconsciously. So it's a fascinating conversation. One bigger than, just The Wizard of the Kremlin,
Absolutely. Let's use that actually as a segue, because there's two films that has struck us as probably the two biggest films we've seen recently as well. So they're fresh in our minds. In terms of the political engagement that cinema can have on two of possibly the most important issues of our day, one being Gaza, the other being the imminent nuclear war that we are, the doomsday clock has been moved forward a few seconds. The nuclear we've just while we've been at the festival enjoyed a military parade in China, which I don't know about you, but was reminiscent for me of the 1980s sort of Red Square parades that you would see on a regular basis, and that sort of saber rattling that would happen between the great powers. So I think we should start with A House of Dynamite. This is Catherine Bigelow coming back after Detroit, which was a film that I honestly can't quite understand how everybody reacted so negatively to it. I didn't think it was her best film by any stretch of the imagination, but I didn't think it was a bad film. And I sort of felt that it was a good faith film that was actually trying to do something which Bigelow has really consistently done, which is to engage classical Hollywood narrative in politics, and make films which are dramatic, which have got name actors, but are really really dealing with issues in a way which isn't necessarily sentimental or propaganda or cliched or anything. This film, House of Dynamite, is recounts a mystery launch of a missile from the ocean, so they're not quite sure who has launched this missile. It is all they know is it's heading towards continental United States, and it will land in approximately 20 minutes. And and you basically see this information going up the chain of command through 3 sort of separate retellings of the same sort of 20-minute period towards impact. The cast is filled out by the likes of Jason Clarke, who obviously was already in Zero Dark 30, Rebecca Ferguson, Idris Elba, Jared Harris. I mean, there's so much. Tracy Letts has a wonderful part. I've never seen Tracy Letts turn up in a film and he's disappointed me. He always manages to boss whatever scene he is in to his own benefit, and here there's no difference. It's absolutely gripping thriller for me. I saw in your review that you liked it as well. Let's talk about this one.
Yeah, it's a riveting film. What you say about Bigelow is interesting and I think true. You know, early in her career, I mean, she had her very first films, which are actually kind of hard to find sometimes, but you know, her initial reputation was as a real action director, kind of, you know, the rare, perhaps the only female action director, you know, a filmmaker who kind of was as proficient with the boys with their toys, jacked up, testosterone-laden 90s action as much as, you know, the big boys were. And of course she was married to James Cameron, so that sort of added to it. But, you know, with Point Break and things like that, and even something like Strange Days, which has a lot of political ideas in it, was very much marketed as a kind of, you know, sci-fi, action, adventure, thriller kind of thing. And then, of course, with The Hurt Locker, she entered a phase where her films were much more politically engaged. And, you know, I still think Zero Dark 30 is a kind of masterpiece, but its reputation has been quite tarnished by the sense that, you know, maybe she and her screenwriter maybe kind of fell under the spell of their CIA handlers and sort of gave a vision of events that was, you know, a little too favorable to the CIA's torture program and things like that. I didn't get that from the film, actually. I find that film very damning in certain ways. But, you know, that's a different conversation. And Detroit, I thought, was, you know, I agree with you that Detroit came from a good place, certainly. I thought it was just kind of a mess. I mean, there's great stuff in Detroit. My feeling about Detroit was, as I was watching it, I even thought, there has to be a different cut of this film somewhere, because characters are kind of dropped. She has trouble handling the sort of multi-character nature of the story, the different story threads. Certain characters show up just to get sort of brutalized on screen for, you know, what seems like half an hour, and then they're dropped, and it feels almost like, I know some people thought it felt kind of exploitative. I think that's why it feels exploitative. I don't think the film is necessarily exploitative, but it just feels unbalanced in that way. I genuinely thought we would eventually see like a 4-hour cut of Detroit, which would be much better or something, but that never materialized. So I don't know if it exists or not. But no, this is a real return to form for her, insofar as, you know, she's very good with these tight ticking clock narratives. It has a real sort of propulsive energy. You know, it's not a testosterone action flick. I mean, it is quite harrowing from the very beginning. You know, the other thing I kept thinking of about the film was, you know, in many ways it's very predictable, right? I mean, you kind of know, like, I knew what was going to happen at the end of this movie, and I knew what was going to happen at various points. Like, I just knew as soon as it started, I was like, I know where this is going. And yet I was completely on the edge of my seat throughout. And that's, I think, the sign of a really good director, you know? Like, I think overall it was predictable, but I would never call the film predictable, you know? And I thought the script had a kind of elegance as well, or the structure had a kind of elegance in those 3 sections, which obviously, as you said, go up the chain of command. But they also follow the missile on its trajectory. So as it sort of passes through each section of the film, let's say, even though they do overlap, it becomes after each point, it sort of becomes someone else's problem, essentially. And as it becomes another person's problem or another couple of people's problems, the movie moves in these three sections with one final coda, which we won't reveal. But yeah, I thought it was beautifully done. Absolutely, just riveted to my seat. It's very nice to have her back, and I'll be curious to see what the response to this film is like. Also, because of the legacy of Zero Dark 30, and also because some people found Detroit exploitative, there is this weird sort of suspicion of Catherine Bigelow. And I already saw that with some people's response, not to the film necessarily. I mean, some people I think had this response to the film, but some people, without having seen the film, think that it's kind of sort of, national security propaganda or something like that. And again, I think it's the exact opposite. I mean, this is everybody in the system doing their jobs to the best of their ability, and everything is still completely fucked. I mean, it's all about systemic failure, even when the system works. And that is, if that's not terrifying, I don't know what is, Like, this is in no way to me a kind of propaganda or some kind of, saber rattling. I mean, absolutely not saber rattling or even kind of flexing about what a great sort of nuclear deterrent or nuclear defense system the U.S. has. What it's really saying is, your system actually might not work. There's a very good chance it's not going to work, and the consequences could be absolutely awful. Anyway, it is, like I said, I said this in my review, it feels to me like an institutionalist's expression of horror at the perils of the nuclear age. In that sense, it's a lot like Oppenheimer, like it could actually make an interesting double feature with that film.
And what a date that would be. I mean, I love what you say about nothing was surprising and yet you were on the edge of your seat. It's like that old cliche. It was a surprise, but it was also shocking. It wasn't a surprise, but it was shocking. I felt that with this. You see the trajectory of the missile, and there's very little chance of doing anything about it. Yeah. There's one very slim chance, but that's it. And yet at the same time, you're just thinking, I mean, you're kind of thinking, a film, you can't have a film like this, can you? Films don't, nuclear war and the logic of nuclear war are anti-narrative devices. I've read the book, The Nuclear War, a Scenario, which Denis Villeneuve has bought the rights to. And so there's very much a zeitgeist here. James Cameron is going to make a film about Hiroshima, apparently. And has already criticized Oppenheimer in sort of I don't want to be cynical, but boost a little bit of publicity for his own film. So I get the feeling that we're ready to go again with this sort of cinema. It's time for us to look again at this issue. Maybe past time to look at. In the same way, in the 1980s, you had TV films like Threads in England in 1984 and The Day After in 1983. By the way, a TV movie which could be put down as the most significant TV movie in history, in that Ronald Reagan credited it with changing his opinion of nuclear weapons. He wrote in his diary how depressed he was after watching it. Watched it a number of times before meeting Gorbachev in Reykjavik and having the famous, can't we get rid of all of them conversation. So, who knows? Maybe Trump will no, forget it. It's not, I don't think Trump is going to last till the end of this film. Yeah. I also would like to just add something which I think makes this film so amazing an experience to watch. It's such an amazing work of cinema. It's so good watching so many fantastic actors just do stuff and not emote. The emotional impact of this film is in people reining in their emotions because they've got to do their job.
I kept thinking, I say this with love, but I kept thinking of the scene in Notting Hill where Julia Roberts' character is she's running lines with Hugh Grant, and she's going to play a submarine commander, and she's trying to say the lines fast, and she has to, relay all this military jargon, and she's trying to make it sound natural. And, I always think about that whenever I see actors, trying to sort of navigate their way around all these military acronyms and throw orders at each other and stuff like that. But that's the thing. It's like everybody does a great job of actually making it sound like they know what the hell they're talking about, which is especially funny because they are all, not all of them, but a lot of them are foreign actors. I mean, when I say foreign, I mean not American. Rebecca Ferguson is Swedish, but no, she's Swedish, right? Yeah, I mean, Scandinavian for sure. Idris Elba. Where is Jason Clarke from?
Jason Clarke is Australian.
He is Australian, right? I don't know that I've ever heard his actual voice or his actual accent. I guess Tracy Letts is American, Angel Reese is American. She shows up in the film, but it is a very well acted film, and it does also have that thing. Again, Oppenheimer did this as well, and a lot of films have to do this with the sort of ensemble cast of people who aren't actually on screen that much, but each of them is played by a very recognizable actor.
Fitzgerald plays a CNN journalist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And talking about a bigger cut of a film, it's almost like there should be a bigger cut of this film because she seems like she's got a thread of story, and it never happens.
There's just enough of it that you know why she's there.
Yeah.
So it's entirely possible that's all they had. But at the same time, there's so many characters here that you could follow for an entire film. But she does a very good job of juggling all these different parts, and because they're all played by people who are either known stars like Idris Elba and Rebecca Ferguson, or they're played by that guys, right? They're played by Tracy Letts, who most American viewers probably wouldn't recognize as a name, but they'd be like, yeah, that guy, I remember him. He was in Ford versus Ferrari. He was in this, he was in that. Little do they know he's like the greatest playwright of his generation. But exactly. But that's those are directorial choices to do that with those characters and to play those actors that way. And I thought the film did that remarkably well. I mean, early on there's a moment where we see a character at a Confederate reenactment, or not a Confederate, a reenactment of the Gettysburg, of the Battle of Gettysburg. And this is early on. It's about 10 seconds, 15 seconds, very short. And at that point, this person isn't doing anything within the story at that point. But she's played by Greta Lee, right? And so we see her for basically 15 seconds. Okay, she's going to be a thing later on. If that was played by an actor who we didn't quite recognize, or it was kind of an unknown, that would feel like somebody had accidentally spliced in footage from another movie. It would feel wrong. So there are these subtle decisions being made, directorial decisions being made throughout the film that feel transparent, that we don't even think of them as decisions, but these are like really important things to do to put this story together. If Greta Lee's character suddenly showed up an hour and a half into the film and she was at a reenactment of the Battle of Gettysburg, that would feel like so overtly symbolic and loaded and weird and tonally off. But because they've established that early on, it makes perfect sense when she does show up.
Yeah, so I think I wrote in my review that the main character in the film was the missile.
Yeah.
And everything else is an ensemble. And it actually structurally is very much like a 1970s disaster movie.
And we should note the missile is played by Adrian Brody. And he's very good. I mean, what can't he do?
In some ways, the nuclear missiles were the friends we made along the way, I feel. That's just become my go-to line for any movie I see. The friends we made along the way. Okay, let's move on to another film which I think is probably the most politically charged film of the festival. We had a demonstration on Saturday The very first day of the festival, I walked down to the beach and there was a press conference and a demonstration. I'm of course talking about demonstrations against the Israeli action in Gaza. Let's call it a genocide, which is what it is. And the film that is in competition, The Voice of Hind Rajab. This is a film by a Tunisian filmmaker, Kauthar Ben Hania. Am I pronouncing the name correctly? Yeah. Someone I've met before at the Red Sea Film Festival, I remember. Somebody who's already made Four Daughters, which is a sort of hybrid documentary, which this film in some ways is a development of. This film recounts the story of a 5-year-old girl who was trapped with members of her extended family as they were trying to flee a zone which the Israeli military had occupied in northern Gaza. Her cousins and her uncles and aunt were killed in the car, and she was on the telephone with a Red Crescent emergency group who were trying to organize her rescue. The ambulance is a mere 8 minutes away, but because of the torturous bureaucracy that has to be done in order for that ambulance crew to move safely through a war zone to rescue her, it takes hours before that is even possible. I mean, talking about spoilers with a film like this seems ridiculous because it's documented fact. It's recent history. It happened in 2024, January 2024. The ambulance crew, when it eventually showed up, I think several hours, like 7, 8 o'clock in the evening, was immediately bombed and everyone was killed. And the child, Hind Rajab, was also killed subsequently. Okay, so that's the background. That's the situation when we saw it yesterday morning. I think we were both at the same screening, the 8:30 screening in the Darsana. I've never been at a press screening that was so emotionally charged, and people were just sat in their seats unable to move because they were weeping. And let's talk about this one.
Yeah, it's a very powerful film. And obviously, because of what's happening in Gaza and because of, things like the big protest, which I visited as well for several hours and watched it. And the fact that all these things that are happening and it looks like, Israel is planning on entering Gaza again, and basically kind of, what they've decided is their kind of big final assault. All these things are top of mind for everybody. So the film is already playing at a time, at a sensitive time and a time when people will be responsive to this material. So before the film, I thought to myself, regardless of whether the film is any, quote unquote good or not, I think people will respond to it. On top of that, the film is excellent. The film is incredibly well made, and in fact, is not unlike House of Dynamite in its approach, because, House of Dynamite is all about people in these kind of control rooms and things like that. We never see the missile in House of Dynamite, even though it is played by Adrian Brody. But he's been cut out of the movie as a whole thing that seems to happen to him now and again. But no, sorry, I shouldn't make jokes in this context. But we don't see the missile. What we're seeing is people responding to something that's happening and doing their jobs the best they can, and then becoming aware of their helplessness, which is also what this movie is. It's these people. They have their processes. They have the things they do, they have their options, and they discover very quickly that, their options are incredibly limited. And there's all sorts of context that's really important, and it is explained to us. And in fact, it's explained to us in ways that are, almost kind of Hollywood simple, right? Because I think Kauthar Ben Hania really realizes that we need to understand this. the emergency center, this Red Cross emergency call center, is in Ramallah, just 52 miles away from Gaza City. And it's in Ramallah because the one in Gaza City can't be used because it's either been bombed to smithereens or, they have to evacuate it because it was so dangerous. So all the calls are being diverted to this call center that's, 50 miles away. At the same time, they have their ambulance crew that is 8 minutes away, but they can't get to Hanud, as she's called, Hind Rajab, because there is a process they have to follow, which involves going through intermediaries to eventually the Israeli army, who then tell them, this is the path you must follow, this is the safe passage, this is the safe exit, this is the secure path you must take. And it takes a while to establish that, and it takes a while to communicate with these people. And every time you fail to do that, you have to go through the whole process again. All this stuff, and this is all outlined for us. I mean, it's very helpfully outlined by the head dispatcher to one of the other dispatchers, even though they would all know this process by that point, but it's being done for our benefit, which is fine. All these things are really important because otherwise, these people could have probably run out the door and just run down the street or gotten in their cars and tried to save her themselves. They can't. Too far away. And obviously too dangerous. So this helplessness they feel is really critical to our helplessness as well. And I think that's also what fuels the film's kind of few stylistic digressions, or kind of metatextual digressions, where we should say the audio of Hind Rajab that we're listening to in the film is the real audio. There isn't an actress playing the girl. This is her voice. And this is the real audio that's being used. There's also, I believe, the real audio of the rescuers, because we don't ever see them. We hear them on the phone a couple of times. And there are moments where we hear the real dispatchers talking to the girl. And those aren't the actors. We can tell the voices are a little different. And then there are even a couple of scenes where we see the actors listening to the audio without speaking. And they hear their characters' real versions, voices on the audio. And then there are a couple of scenes where where we hear the real audio and then they speak the line. And then there's another scene where we see a phone in the foreground of the frame is a cell phone that has footage of the real dispatchers as they spoke to Hind Rajab, and in the background, blurry, we see the actors. And part of that is, I think, also to slyly express to us, she's sticking to the facts here. She has recreated this thing pretty exactly. She's not taking a million shortcuts. She's not coming up with new fictional scenarios to make it more dramatic or to make it more suspenseful. But these little elements highlight the actor's own helplessness, right? These are actors. They're I don't know what their lives are like, but they're not, being blown away by the Israeli military right now. So the actors kind of become audience surrogates in that way, in these moments. And we, their helplessness comes through on the screen, and then we then feel that same helplessness. The other thing that happens in these scenes is, this contextualization, Kather Ben-Hania could have made this film really riveting in a kind of sensationalistic, fictional way. She could have turned it into House of Dynamite. This is not a knock on House of Dynamite. House of Dynamite is a fictional movie. But she could have, because this is an event that happened less than 2 years ago. She's dealing with something very sensitive, and she's dealing with a situation where she could easily be accused of exploiting a real life tragedy. And even though she has the blessing of the mother and all that, so she has the right to do it, but, is it ethically correct is a question that some people will still ask, sincerely or cynically. And what she does, and I said this in my review, and I don't want to sound like I'm making excuses, but she lets the tension flag in the film, right? It doesn't become this thing where we're just like listening to, you know, her voice and everybody's racing and it just like the tension builds, the suspense builds, and it's like ticking clock and we're getting closer and closer and closer and closer, and then at the last second everybody's killed. I mean, that would be exploitative. I mean, the film is suspenseful, the film is gripping, but she doesn't try to sort of add extra artificial elements, dramatic elements to try and build this narrative into something more, I don't want to say more audience friendly, because the film is, you know, it's not like it's a tough film to watch, but it's not a difficult film to understand or anything like that. But I do think that that's like a really important thing that she does. I would say a very brave directorial choice, because it would be very easy to try and kind of make this like a really kind of riveting, or to even tighten it further or something like that. It's only 90 minutes long. The film breezes by, if we can use such an expression. But I do think that that's a really, really important choice, and one that I think really pays artistic dividends. And the other thing is, you know, we are listening to the real audio, and Hanoud's voice, she keeps saying the same things over and over again. You know, she's not, you know, there's no adorable scenes of her saying cute kitty things. I mean, this girl is traumatized. She's in shock. She just keeps saying the same. She was, please get me. I'm scared. Please get me. Please get me. Come get me. Please get me. I mean, she just basically says the same things over and over and over again. And and Kautar Benhania leaves all of that in there. You know, she could have pulled that back. She could have cut some of that, you know, so that it didn't get so repetitive. But that is what she said, before she died. And that is, I think it's a really bold choice to leave that in, even though it's probably the only choice. You know, I mean, all movies are a series of hundreds of decisions. We critics and other people sometimes often make the mistake of looking at a movie as if it's one binary decision, on, off, good, bad. But that's not the case. Movies are, I mean, anybody who's directed a film can tell you, a movie is hundreds of decisions, right? And the director's job is to just make a million decisions, right? They don't design the costumes, they don't give the performances, sometimes they don't write the dialogue, you know, they don't design the sets. Their job is to look at something and say yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. And not every decision is ever going to be correct. And some decisions can be, you know, the set can be like this or it can be like that, you know. You don't know what the right decision is. Here's a movie, though, where so many of the decisions are either the right decision or the wrong decision. I mean, it is a minefield of decision-making, this film. It could have gone wrong in so many ways, and it doesn't. I think, by and large, she made the right decision every time with the film. And I think, you know, I do think it's got a very good chance to win the Golden Lion. Yeah, I always get the Golden Bear, Golden Lion mixed up. You know, it might not win. I feel like it'll probably win something. I think it'll be a major film. It doesn't have a U.S. I don't know if it technically has a U.S. distributor yet, or a U.S. release date, but I imagine that it'll be an Oscar submission. I think we'll be hearing about this film quite a bit in the months to come.
Yeah, I think in a sense it would be a extremely popular choice as a winner of the Golden Lion. It would be also, to some degree, a choice which would validate the film festival as well. It would be good for Venice as a festival to show that I always had this feeling with Cannes, where there was a wonderful film from Gaza, or film by an Iranian director about Gaza called Take Your Soul on Your Hand and Walk. And I felt very uncomfortable. I wrote a piece about this, sort of watching this kind of film, and you go outside to where the super yachts sleep in the harbour. And I don't feel that's... I feel the dissonance in our activity, being in these luxurious places, doing these privileged things, and then watching this horrific genocide take place, which is, these criticisms are included in the film. One of the characters, when they're doing that filming, they're doing it specifically for social media. And one of the characters gets very irritated by this and says, they've seen enough dead babies. Do you think this is ever going to change anything? They already know this. And so that also is a comment on the film itself. This film is not telling you anything you don't know. You know about this specific outrage. In fact, I think you said in your review that was several outrages back. Yeah. I have talked to some people, and some people I respect, who say, but the use of the audio in this film is unethical. I have absolutely no idea what that is. I'm actually really intellectually curious I want to hear what that argument is, because in a world in which a 6-year-old child is targeted, which is a point that is also made in the film, that you don't think the Israeli army knows there's a child in there, with all the infrared equipment that they have, with all the time that they have to survey a zone that they're absolutely dominant in. You don't think that you think this is some sort of accident that this is happening. In a world where that is happening, that ethical abomination, to talk about the ethics of filmmaking and using real dialogue, real audio versus not using it, and reenactment, or using real footage at the end of the film instead of using. It just strikes me as it's like Colonel Kurtz in Apocalypse Now criticizing the U.S. Army for forbidding young men from writing "fuck" on their aeroplanes before they drop napalm on women and children. It's an upside down, topsy turvy moral universe, and I won't countenance it. I won't have anything to do with that kind of subtlety anymore, that sort of nuance anymore, because I think it's false. I think it's what we would call in the old days bourgeois nonsense. I found the film extremely moving. I found the use of as you say, the unscripted use of her voice incredibly moving, also because she would say things like, at the very beginning she says they're all asleep, and then she has to be, they need the information. Are they really asleep? No, they're dead, she says. And at that point, you're listening to, as you say, a traumatized child having to admit to herself that the story she's telling herself is not true. That breaks my heart. That breaks my heart as a father, but it breaks my heart more than anything as a human being. In a world, on a more general level, in a world that we live in today, we need to re-find our humanity. And this is a film which is a plea for humanity. And it shows you good people trying to capture that at sacrifice to their own lives. In the case of the ambulance workers who have been, this has one of the, again, like the missile landing, this is a gut punch, even though it's going to happen all the way through. But when they sort of celebrate, we've done it, they're there, they're almost there, and then bang. Yeah. And you hear the audio of that. It is one of the most devastating things I've ever felt. And to feel that in a film when we're almost feeling it on a daily basis just looking at the news is a artistic achievement which is to be celebrated. And artistic, I mean in the core mission of experimenting and pushing the possibilities of being human. I don't mean it in the sense of something beautiful or aesthetic. And we need this, and we really need this. So I really hope it does do well, both. And I don't, frankly, I don't give a fuck about competitions when it comes to art. It's not a foot race. All of these films win their own competition on their own terms. Even films I might not, I'm sure J. Kelly is good for a certain audience. It will win that competition with a certain audience and will be perfect. And that's fine. I have no problem with that. I can argue about it in another way. But is there a film that's more vital or important than this at the moment? No, I don't think so.
As much as I like Jay Kelly, no. Yeah, it's not, No, absolutely, and that's why that's why this film I think really struck people because it is very well made. And another thing I thought about, I didn't mention this in my review, but last year there was a film called September 5th, which I liked. I thought it was actually a very, very well done thriller. I mean, it was a film about the kidnapping and the murder of the Israeli team at the 1972 Munich Olympics, and but it was told entirely from the point of view of the ABC News, ABC Sports team that wound up, because of the way the satellites were arranged back then, they wound up having to basically cover it for the U.S. and much of the world. And that film was also set entirely inside the studio. And they also used real footage of what was being broadcast on TV. They used the real footage. They took like real televisions from that period, real equipment, and played this footage so that the actors were responding to like, their real life counterparts on the video screens. And obviously the issue is pertinent because, the Israel-Palestine thing, but I don't think anybody said at the time that movie was in any way unethical. And obviously it's much older event, but when people start to say things like, well, this is unethical, it's like, where do you draw the line? Is there a particular date beyond which it becomes ethical? Like, I don't know. Like, it seems like such a strange criticism to me. There are ways to unethically use this stuff. I certainly don't think the film does it, but I don't think it has to do with dates. I don't think it has to do with, like, the too soon thing is a meme, but that was that was largely a joke, so it's not a real thing. I mean, yes, maybe, but certainly not in this case, especially when you're trying to make an impact. I mean, you're not just, this isn't a case of a filmmaker using this footage because they want to make some money or they want to entertain an audience, It would be unethical if they saved Indra Job at the end or something like that, if she rewrote the story or something like that. But this is, it's a docudrama, as we say, and I think it's really well done.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting you mentioned September the 7th, because I think, and September the 5th, sorry, and also the thing about this relates a little bit to the Smashing Machine. Stay with me. Yeah. It's the way you frame a true story. Yeah. And there's always I really don't like it, there's always this, and a little bit Dead Man's Wire does this, the Gus Van Sant movie. Does it in a way that actually I don't mind it so much. But there's this way that you frame something in which you kind of make it into an achievement or winning. And September the 5th is about this terrible tragedy. But when you get the title cards, it's sort of like, this was the most watched live event. And it's like, oh, look at you. Well done you. How well you did to create this. And it's kind of like, isn't that feels unethical. To look at a tragedy and think, it's sort of like you wound down your window faster than anybody else to capture the car accident you were driving by. And like, I thought the same thing with the Smashing Machine, where it said, Mark Kerr pioneered a sport which nowadays people become millionaires playing. It's just like, so what? You don't automatically get, why are you framing this as if there's some sort of tragedy involved in not getting $1 million, As for Dead Man's Wire, it was much more just straightforwardly, this is the truth, Listen, I think we're going to have to sort of wrap up our conversation. I know you've got somewhere else to go, a prior engagement, but let's just for a very final sort of comment on this film festival, highest and lowest. And after not saying this is not a foot race, but sort of your personal sort of takeaway from the festival.
I mean, I haven't thought about ranking anything yet, but the films that we talked about today are actually, I think, my favorites at the festival. Wizard of the Kremlin, Voice of Indra Job, A House of Dynamite. I think those are the three films. I mean, there are a couple others as well, but those are the three that really jumped out at me as being, the films that I can see really lasting from the festival. There are other films. There are a number of films I really did like at the festival. And
Frankenstein?
I loved Frankenstein once Jacob Elordi showed up as the monster. Frankenstein is all about the monster. And I thought there's a whole other conversation. I thought there was so much achievement in Frankenstein. The first hour kind of left me cold, and I think Oscar Isaac is weirdly miscast as Victor Frankenstein. And I thought, actually, I was kind of worried that the film was just going to be kind of a dud for me. And then Jacob Elordi came in and brought all the soul and was so good. And then the film really clicked. So I liked Frankenstein ultimately.
Hand of Dante?
In the Hand of Dante. Absolutely atrocious. I will not stand for comparisons to Megalopolis. Megalopolis is goofy, charming, entertaining, wildly uneven, ridiculous, insane. Certainly, In the Hand of Dante is just turgid and boring and stupid in all sorts of ways. I haven't reviewed it. I don't know if I will, but it's The Hand of Dante is just complete catastrophe. Yeah.
Well, on that bombshell, thank you so much for joining me, Bilge, and just remind everybody that you can read Bilge's writing at Vulture. I've just subscribed for $4 a month for a trial subscription, and it's well worth it just for Bilge's writing. Everybody else in the magazine's rubbish. It's nobody else worth reading. I'm joking, of course. Many fine writers there, but thank you once more, Bilge.
Thank you. Always good to be here. Thank you.